He divorced his invisible wife. Then a Mafia king's jet came to bring her home. Caleb Vossler pressed his pen to the signature line and didn't hesitate, not even for a second. That was what destroyed him later. Not the divorce itself, but how easy it had been. 3 years of marriage, and his hand never trembled. The courthouse clerk stamped the papers. The attorney slid a copy across the table. And the woman who had shared his bed, his home, his name, Elena Marlowe, sat across from him with eyes so still they looked like the surface of a lake before a storm breaks beneath it. She said nothing. She signed. She folded her copy and placed it inside her bag like a grocery receipt. Caleb told himself that proved everything he'd believed about her. He was wrong about all of it. If you've ever dismissed someone you loved, if you've ever let pride convince you that silence meant weakness, then you already know exactly where this story is going. And you won't be able to look away. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell, because we drop stories every week that will shake you to your core. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you make it to the end, hit that like button. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the end. The morning of the divorce, Caleb woke before his alarm. He lay in the gray light of his penthouse bedroom and stared at the ceiling for 11 minutes. He counted, because counting was something he did when the silence got too loud. It had been getting louder for months. That was Elena's fault, he believed. She had turned their home into a museum. Quiet rooms, separate schedules, dinners where he spoke about acquisition deals, and she responded in complete sentences that somehow communicated nothing at all. He had married a woman who felt like a rumor even when she was sitting 2 feet away. His phone lit up. His assistant, Garrett Wynn, texting at 6:42 in the morning. Courthouse confirmed for 9. Drivers ready when you are. You doing okay? Caleb typed back. Never better. He meant it. That was the most damning part. He showered, dressed in the charcoal suit Elena had once told him, made him look like someone trying too hard. He'd worn it anyway. He always wore it anyway. He was a man who had built a 9-figure real estate and development empire by the age of 38 through an absolute refusal to be told what to do, what to feel, or what to slow down for. His company, Vossler Group, had restructured struggling markets in 4 cities. He had been on the cover of 2 national business publications and had a reputation for being the sharpest negotiator in any room. He was also, though he would not have admitted this at gunpoint, profoundly lonely. He found Elena already in the kitchen when he came downstairs. She was standing at the counter with a cup of tea, dressed simply, her dark hair pulled back, and she looked— this was the thing that stuck with him later, the image that came back in the worst hours. She looked calm. Not cold, not angry. Calm in the way that people are when they have already survived something, and the official ending is just paperwork. You eat? He asked. I'm fine. I'll have the car at 9. I know, she said. Garrett confirmed with me too. He grabbed his coffee. She turned slightly toward the window. They stood in the same kitchen, 8 feet apart, and the silence between them had weight and texture and a specific temperature. Caleb thought, this is already over. We're just making it official. Elena thought something too, but she kept it behind her teeth, where she had kept almost everything for 3 years. The courthouse was in the financial district, a gray stone building that had processed 10,000 divorces in its lifetime without blinking. Rain had started around 8 and hadn't let up. Caleb arrived in the black car with Garrett beside him, because Garrett went everywhere with him, and because Caleb did not particularly enjoy being alone in enclosed spaces with his own thoughts. Elena arrived separately. She stepped out of a black sedan, not the company car, her own arrangement, with a single leather bag and no umbrella. The rain hit her coat and she didn't rush. She walked into the building at exactly 8:57. Caleb watched from the top of the steps and felt a flash of something that was almost admiration. He shut it down. They sat across from each other in the attorney's conference room, his attorneys on his side. Her single attorney, a quiet, precise woman named Dara Keene, on hers. The documents were already prepared. Elena had not contested a single asset division. She had not made demands. She had asked for nothing except the dissolution itself. That had bothered Caleb more than any demand could have. He had been prepared for a fight. He had expected one. He had wanted one, if he was honest, because a fight would have proven that the marriage meant something to her, that he had meant something, that the silence had been a choice and not a symptom of complete emotional vacancy. She gave him nothing to push against. The signing took less than 20 minutes. When it was done, Elena stood, buttoned her coat, shook Darakeen's hand, and nodded once toward Caleb. Not cold, not warm, just acknowledging, and walked out of the room. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Garrett clapped him on the shoulder once, awkward and well-meaning. "Clean break," Garrett said. "Yeah," Caleb said. Then the sound hit them. It was not subtle. The roar of jet engines low over the city, close enough that the conference room windows vibrated and the pendant lights swayed on their fixtures. People in the building stopped talking. Someone down the hall said something sharp and alarmed. Caleb went to the window. Through the rain-blurred glass, descending toward the private aviation terminal 6 blocks east, was a black aircraft. Not a standard charter. Something built for range and statement. A long-range jet with no visible markings except a subtle crest on the tail that Caleb couldn't make out at this distance. "What airline is that?" Garrett asked. "That's not an airline," Caleb said quietly. His phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer. He answered. "Mr. Vossler." The voice on the line was male, calm, the kind of calm that only comes from never having had reason to be afraid. European accent, though Caleb couldn't place which country. "Congratulations on your divorce. Adrian Ravel would like to introduce himself." Caleb's blood went cold before he even knew why. He knew the name. Everyone in the business world who operated at his level knew the name, even if they pretended not to. Even if they changed the subject when it came up at dinner parties and charity events. Adrian Ravel was not a myth, and not precisely a legitimate businessman. He was the head of an international organization, the polite word was conglomerate, that controlled shipping routes, private financial channels, and if the rumors had any basis, significant underground networks spanning 3 continents. He was a man who existed at the edges of legitimate power and who had never once been arrested, charged, or even officially questioned. His name appeared in no court documents. His face appeared in no newspapers. He was known through silence and implication and the very specific expression that came over powerful people's faces when someone mentioned him at the wrong moment. "I don't have a meeting with Adrian Ravel," Caleb said. "No," the voice agreed pleasantly. "But your wife does." Caleb's jaw tightened. "My ex-wife, as of 20 minutes ago." "Timing is interesting, isn't it?" the voice said, and disconnected. Caleb was down the stairs and through the courthouse lobby in under 2 minutes. Garrett was half running behind him, trying to read something on his phone and talk at the same time. "Caleb, wait, there are vehicles outside, like a lot of them." The front doors of the courthouse opened onto the granite steps and the rain-soaked plaza, and Caleb stopped. There were 14 vehicles that he could count immediately. Black SUVs and sedans, arranged in a configuration that was not parking. It was positioning. 12 men stood in the rain without umbrellas, in dark coats, positioned at intervals around the courthouse entrance, along the steps, flanking the main walkway. They were not uniformed. They were not visibly armed, though Caleb understood with a physical certainty that this was a formality of appearances only. They were not looking at him. They were watching the doors, waiting. Elena came through those doors 30 seconds after Caleb did. She stopped when she saw the vehicles. She stopped when she saw the men. And then something happened that Caleb had never witnessed in 3 years of living beside her. Her composure cracked. Just for a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4. Her face opened into something that was equal parts grief and relief, as though she had been waiting for a verdict on something and had finally heard it. Then she collected herself. She straightened her shoulders. At the center of the plaza, stepping out from the lead vehicle with no visible hurry, was a man Caleb estimated at early 50s, lean and deliberate in his movements, wearing a coat that had not been purchased in this country. Gray at his temples, eyes that did something unusual. They moved across the entire space before landing on Elena, cataloging everything first. Adrian Ravel crossed the rain-wet plaza and stopped in front of Elena Marlowe. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at her with an expression that Caleb had no vocabulary for because it was not romantic and it was not purely protective and it was not simply relief. It was the expression of a man who had been responsible for something irreplaceable and had been living for years with the specific weight of that responsibility. You didn't call, Adrian said. I handled it, Elena said. You've been handling it for 3 years alone. I'm fine. Elena. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The Hartwell people know who you are. That changed 4 days ago. You understand what that means. The color left her face. Not dramatics. Genuinely, visibly, the blood went somewhere else. How? We'll talk on the plane. She didn't move immediately. She stood in the rain and she looked, and Caleb was 10 steps away watching this happen in real time, soaked through his charcoal suit, invisible to everyone present. She looked like a woman who had just had the wall she'd spent 3 years building come down all at once. Okay, she said. Quiet. Just that. And then she walked toward the lead vehicle. She was almost at the door when Caleb's voice came out of him. He hadn't planned it. He had not decided to speak. It just happened, the way things happen when something in you overrides the part that calculates consequences. Elena. She stopped. She turned. She looked at him directly for the first time all morning, really looked, not the courthouse room neutral distance, and the look on her face was something he would spend the next several weeks trying to correctly identify. Not anger, not sadness. Something more specific than either. Go home, Caleb, she said. You're free now. That's what you wanted. She got into the vehicle. The door closed. 14 cars moved in quiet, coordinated sequence, and in 45 seconds, the plaza was empty, except for Caleb Vossler standing in the rain and his assistant Garrett, who had the good instincts to say absolutely nothing. Wow. Caleb went back to the office. This was, in retrospect, a remarkable act of self-delusion. The idea that there was work to return to, that the morning could simply continue, that the sight of his ex-wife being escorted away by a Mafia king's private security detail was something he could file under her problem and move forward. He lasted 4 hours. He sat in his corner office on the 23rd floor with his city visible through floor-to-ceiling glass, and he stared at a contract for a mixed-use development in the Harbor District that he'd been negotiating for 6 weeks, and he read the same paragraph 11 times without retaining a single word. Elena had not contested the divorce. She had asked for nothing. She had been alone in his house for 3 years because he was traveling or at events or simply working late, always working late, and she had said very little, and he had interpreted that silence as emotional unavailability, as indifference, as evidence that she was exactly what his mother had called her at Christmas 2 years ago, a cold, strange woman who had no real feeling for anyone. Adrian Ravel had flown a private jet to the city the same morning as the divorce, not the same week, not by coincidence of scheduling, the same morning. Caleb pulled his laptop close and typed the name. He had done this before him. Everyone did it. And arrived at the usual results. Financial news references that were carefully vague, 2 think pieces about international shadow economies that mentioned him without confirming anything, a photograph from a European charity event 4 years ago that showed a man with gray temples and very still eyes at the periphery of a crowd. He searched Elena's family name, Marlowe. He had never done this thoroughly before, which was now striking him as a significant personal failure. He'd known she came from money that had been lost. Her parents were dead. She had a distant family connection to some kind of private investment legacy that had dissolved years ago, and she'd never pressed the subject. He found something he hadn't noticed before, a footnote in a corporate restructuring document filed in a European court 6 years ago, a reference to a trust controlled by a holding company. The holding company's ultimate beneficiary listed as a minor at the time of filing, identified only by initials. EM. The document was 22 pages long and Caleb read all of them. By the time he finished, his coffee was cold, the city lights had come on outside his windows, and his hands were absolutely steady because he was in a state of focused dread that had bypassed fear and arrived somewhere on the other side of it. Elena Marlowe was not a woman with a dissolved inheritance. She was the protected beneficiary of a private financial legacy that, conservatively, based on the numbers referenced in this one document, represented hundreds of millions in assets that had been placed in protective trust, kept hidden, kept specifically hidden from parties who, the document's language implied without naming, had been attempting to access or control those assets. And someone had been hunting her, not metaphorically. Someone had been hunting Elena Marlowe, and she had walked into Caleb's life and stayed quiet and stayed small and allowed him to believe she was nothing because being nothing was the only way to stay invisible, and being invisible had kept her alive. Caleb sat with this for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Garrett. "I need everything you can find on a holding company called—" He rattled off the name from the document. "And I need the name of whoever inside this company has been managing our residential property acquisitions in the North Corridor for the last 4 years." Garrett paused. "That's Marcus Hale's division." "I know whose division it is," Caleb said. "Get me everything." "Caleb, what's going on?" Caleb stood up from his desk and looked at the city through the glass. The rain had stopped. The lights were sharp and clear, and the whole city looked rinsed clean. "I made a mistake," he said. "A very large, very specific mistake, and I'm going to need to understand exactly how large it was before I decide what to do about it." He hung up. He stood at the window for another minute. Elena had looked at him in the rain and said, "Go home, Caleb. You're free now. That's what you wanted." And the most unsettling thing, the thing he could not put down, was that she hadn't said it with bitterness. She'd said it like a woman who had expected exactly this outcome and had planned around it, the way you plan around weather, the way you accept what you cannot change. He had been the variable she'd accounted for. He had been the man she'd protected without telling him she was doing it. And he had signed the papers and let her walk out the door. He moved back to his desk. He pulled up Marcus Hale's personnel file. He opened the financial records for the North Corridor division. He cross-referenced 3 years of acquisition documentation against the holding company name from Elena's trust document. The first match appeared in 11 minutes, the second in 20. By the time he reached the 7th direct connection between Marcus Hale's acquisition decisions and entities linked to Elena's family legacy, Caleb's expression had gone very still and very focused in a way that his competitors recognized and his employees dreaded. He was not angry yet. He was understanding, and understanding, for a man like Caleb Vossler, was always more dangerous than anger. He picked up the phone again. Not Garrett this time. He called a number he'd kept in his contacts for 2 years without ever using it. A security consultant, the kind who worked for people with complicated problems and who did not ask questions about the nature of those complications. "It's Caleb Vossler," he said when the line connected. "I need to find someone. She left this city approximately 6 hours ago on a private aircraft. I need to know where it landed." A pause. "Is this a legal matter, Mr. Vossler?" "It's a personal one," Caleb said. "Which means I'll pay accordingly." Another pause, shorter. "Give me until morning," the consultant said. Caleb set the phone down. He looked at the document on his screen. EM. A minor at the time of filing, placed under protective trust, hidden from parties attempting to access or control those assets. Elena had been 17 years old when someone started hunting her family's legacy. She had been 26 when she walked into his life. She had been 29 when she had allowed Caleb Vossler, who was supposed to be intelligent, who was supposed to be perceptive, who had built a 9-figure empire on reading people and situations correctly, to divorce her in a courthouse while a man who had been protecting her since childhood flew across the world to make sure she survived what came next. Caleb pressed 2 fingers to his eyes. Outside, the city moved and breathed and was indifferent to all of it. He had a lot of work to do. Caleb did not sleep. He told himself he was working, which was technically accurate. He spent the hours between midnight and 4 in the morning going through 6 years of Vossler Group acquisition records with the kind of methodical focus that had made him wealthy and had also, he was beginning to understand, made him blind. You could not look at spreadsheets all day and still see the person sitting across from you at dinner. You could not optimize everything and also pay attention to the things that didn't announce themselves. Marcus Hale's fingerprints were everywhere once Caleb knew what he was looking for. Not obvious, not sloppy. Marcus was not a sloppy man. Caleb had hired him precisely because he was meticulous, detail-oriented, the kind of executive who could run 3 concurrent negotiations without dropping a thread. He had been with Vossler Group for 5 years. He had a reputation inside the company for being direct, fair, occasionally ruthless in contract talks, and completely loyal to Caleb's vision. Every single one of those qualities, Caleb now realized, could describe a man running a long con. The North Corridor acquisitions were the clearest thread. Over 4 years, Marcus had steered Vossler Group toward 11 specific property purchases in a concentrated zone of the city. Warehouse conversions, mixed-use lots, 2 historic buildings with complicated ownership histories. Caleb had approved all of them because the numbers worked, and because Marcus presented them well, and because Caleb trusted his own judgment in reading people, which had turned out to be the most expensive mistake of his professional life. 3 of those properties shared a common thread in their title chains. Shell companies. The shell companies connected, through 3 or 4 layers of corporate paperwork, to a holding entity registered in a jurisdiction known for privacy protections and minimal disclosure requirements. And that entity, Caleb confirmed this at 2:47 in the morning with his eyes dry and burning from the screen, shared directorship overlap with the same financial network referenced in Elena's trust documents. Marcus had not been working for Vossler Group. He had been using Vossler Group, using Caleb's resources, Caleb's reputation, Caleb's access, to quietly maneuver around Elena's family's protected assets, acquiring adjacent properties, building infrastructure, preparing to move on something the moment the protection structure weakened, and the protection structure would weaken the moment Elena was isolated. Caleb sat back in his chair. The office was empty at this hour, just the city outside the glass and the hum of the building systems and the specific silence of a man arriving at an understanding he cannot unfeel. Marcus had engineered the distance between Caleb and Elena, not crudely. No manufactured arguments, no obvious interference. Subtly. The way you redirect water. You don't stop the flow. You just shift the channel slightly, over and over, until the river ends up somewhere completely different from where it started. The late nights Marcus scheduled, the travel conflicts that had consistently fallen on weekends, the offhand comments, never accusations, just observations, about how Elena seemed disconnected, seemed uninterested in Caleb's world, seemed like a woman going through motions. She doesn't come to events, Caleb. People are starting to notice. It doesn't look good. I'm not trying to get in your business, but she seems checked out. You sure she's engaged in this partnership? Some women aren't built for this kind of life. That's not a judgment, just an observation. Caleb remembered every single one of those conversations now with a clarity that was physically uncomfortable, like pressing a bruise that had been ignored so long you'd forgotten it was there. He picked up his phone. It was 3:15. He called Garrett. Garrett picked up on the second ring, which told Caleb that Garrett had also not been sleeping, which told Caleb that Garrett had seen enough of the documents to be alarmed. You found it, Garrett said. Not a question. How much did you find? Enough. A pause. Garrett's voice was careful in the way it got when he was deciding how much to say. Caleb, the North Corridor thing it's not just financial maneuvering. I pulled the permit histories on 2 of those warehouse properties. Someone's been modifying them. Interior build-outs, private access routes, infrastructure that doesn't match any of the stated development plans. When did the modifications start? 3 years ago, almost exactly when you and Elena, Garrett stopped. When we got married, Caleb finished. Silence on the line. He was timing it, Garrett said quietly. He was watching your marriage and timing it. He wasn't watching it. He was managing it. Caleb stood up from his desk. His back ached from hours in the chair, and he didn't care. He made sure it failed on schedule. Caleb, don't tell me to be careful. I'm past careful. I was going to tell you, Garrett said, that my contact at the Aviation Authority came through. The aircraft that left this morning, the Ravel jet, it filed a flight plan to Geneva, but there was a secondary stop, fuel stop, technically, off the filed route, private airstrip outside a town called Keswick. That's in England, Lake District. There's a private estate there, historically associated with the Ravel organization. Not publicized, not on any registry, but it's there. Caleb was already at his office door pulling on his jacket. Book me the first available flight. Caleb. Garrett's voice had an edge to it now. You understand what you're doing, right? You're going to walk into Adrian Ravel's territory to... What exactly? She's not your wife anymore. You signed the papers. I know what I signed. She didn't ask you to come after her. No, Caleb said. She didn't. But she also spent 3 years in my house eating breakfast 6 feet away from me every morning and never once asked me for anything. And it turns out she was doing that to protect me from people who were inside my own company. So maybe I don't need a specific invitation. A long pause. Flight leaves at 6:40, Garrett said. I'll have a car at your building in an hour. Good. And Caleb, Be less arrogant than usual. These are not people who will be impressed by your square footage. Caleb almost laughed. Noted. He hung up. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the office window. The charcoal suit, still on, wrinkled now, his face doing something he didn't entirely recognize. Not the face he wore in boardrooms. Something rawer than that. Something that felt uncomfortably, like a man who had just woken up inside a life he thought he understood. He turned off the office light and walked out. The private estate outside Keswick sat on 40 acres above a lake that was dark and cold and perfectly still in the late afternoon light when Caleb's hired car came up the access road. He had slept 3 hours on the plane, which was not enough, and had spent the remaining 2 hours reading everything publicly available on Adrian Ravel, which amounted to very little of substance and a great deal of implication. The gate was iron. 2 men at the gate, not uniformed, not visibly armed, but Caleb had been in enough high-stakes environments to read the posture. These were not household staff. The car stopped. One of the men approached the driver's window. Caleb rolled down the rear window. "Caleb Vossler," he said. "I'm here to see Elena Marlowe." The man looked at him without expression. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Vossler?" "No?" "Then I'd suggest, tell Adrian Ravel that the man who just handed him Elena on a silver platter by divorcing her on the same morning. His jet landed is at the gate and would like 5 minutes." He held the man's gaze. "He'll want to hear what I found last night. Trust me on that." The man studied him for 3 full seconds. Then he stepped back and spoke quietly into an earpiece. The gate opened. They put him in a sitting room that looked out over the lake. No one offered him tea. No one offered him anything. He stood at the window and watched the water and did not sit down because sitting down felt like conceding something. He heard her before he saw her. Not her voice, her footsteps. A specific rhythm he recognized from 3 years of sharing a house, the way you learn someone sounds without meaning to, the particular cadence of how a person moves through a space. He turned around. Elena stood in the doorway. She was wearing different clothes, dark slacks, a pale shirt, her hair down now, and she looked rested in the way that people look when they've been holding tension for so long that releasing it reads as rest. But her eyes, when they found him across the room, were doing something complicated. "How did you get here?" she asked. Garrett tracked the flight path. Of course he did. She came into the room but didn't close the distance between them. She stopped at the edge of the furniture arrangement, one hand resting lightly on the back of an armchair. "You shouldn't be here, Caleb." "I know. This isn't... You don't understand what you've walked into." "I understand more than I did yesterday," he said. "Marcus Hale. You know that name." Something moved behind her eyes, quick and controlled, but he caught it. "What about Marcus?" she said. Flat, careful. "He's been using my company for 4 years to build infrastructure around your family's trust assets. He's been running a play to isolate you, time the collapse of our marriage, and move the moment your protection structure dropped." He watched her face. "You knew. You already knew." She said nothing. "Elena, don't." Her voice came out harder than she intended. He saw her adjust, recalibrate. "Don't say my name like you've earned something just because you finally read the documents I couldn't show you." "Why couldn't you show me?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me." The words hit the air between them cleanly, with no particular heat, which made them worse. "You had known Marcus for 3 years before we got married. He was your guy, your trusted executive, your inner circle. If I'd come to you and said Marcus Hale is working against us, do you know what you would have done?" Caleb said nothing, because he knew exactly what he would have done. "You would have looked at me, this quiet, strange woman you'd married and weren't entirely sure why. And you would have decided I was paranoid, or jealous of his access to you, or simply wrong." She tilted her head slightly. "Am I incorrect?" The room was very quiet. "No," Caleb said. "You're not incorrect." She exhaled. It wasn't a sigh. It was a release of something she'd been holding for a very long time and was now allowing herself to put down in this specific moment, in this room, in front of him. "I found out about Marcus 8 months into our marriage," she said. "I was going through some financial disclosures, not Vossler Group's, my family's archive material that Adrian had sent me through secure channels. I saw the name of a subsidiary. I recognized it, because I'd seen that same subsidiary on a document in your company's acquisition files. She paused. I knew then. I knew what he was doing, and I knew who he was working for, and I knew that the moment I said anything, it would force an open confrontation that I was not in a position to survive. So you went quiet. I went invisible, she corrected, which is different. Invisible people can still move. They can still work. They just don't give their enemies a target. Caleb moved from the window. He came to stand closer, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough to make the conversation real in a way that shouting across a room couldn't be. The divorce, he said. Was that part of it? She looked at him steadily. What do you think? I think you engineered it. Not a flicker. Go on. I think you let me believe you were checked out, distant, uninterested, because a man convinced his wife doesn't care about him will eventually convince himself to leave, and a man who leaves on his own initiative doesn't look like a man who was manipulated into leaving. He held her gaze. You needed the divorce to look clean, uncontested, nothing that would trigger scrutiny, because if Marcus was watching, and he was watching, a messy divorce would have raised questions. A clean one looked like confirmation, like you were done, diminished, unprotected. And the moment I was officially unprotected, she said quietly, they would move. And Adrian moving the same morning was the counter. Adrian's been waiting for them to move. He needed them to reveal themselves, a provocation large enough to bring them into the open. She paused. They've been careful for years, hidden behind shell companies and proxy moves. But if they believed the protection structure dropped, if they believed I was finally vulnerable and isolated, they would act quickly. Greed always moves faster than patience. Caleb absorbed this. He turned it over. You used yourself as bait. I used the situation as a mechanism, she said. The bait was the asset. The asset is what they've always wanted. And what about you? His voice came out quieter than he intended. Did it matter to you at all? 3 years. You could have told me. You could have... Caleb. Her voice was not unkind. That was somehow harder than unkindness would have been. I need you to hear this clearly. I did not choose to marry you as a strategy. That is not what happened. But I did choose to stay quiet about the danger because telling you would have meant trusting you with something that could have gotten you killed. And I had no evidence that you would have chosen differently than I assumed you would. You didn't trust me. You gave me very little material to work with. The words weren't cruel. They were accurate. And accurate words from someone you've wronged land differently than cruelty does. They sit still in the room instead of dissolving. The door opened. Adrian Ravel came in without knocking, which in his own house was his absolute prerogative, and he looked between Elena and Caleb with the assessment of a man who has spent his life reading rooms quickly and accurately. Mr. Vossler, he said, not unfriendly, not warm. You've had time. I found information, Caleb said, about Marcus Hale and the Vossler Group properties. There are 7 direct links between his acquisition decisions and the entities targeting Elena's trust. I have the documentation. Adrian looked at Elena. He found it in one night, she said. Something in her voice that was not quite pride, but was in the same neighborhood. What do you want, Mr. Vossler? Adrian asked. Specifically. I want to fix what I broke, Caleb said, and I want to understand who I've been working beside for 5 years while he was running a play against my family. The word family landed in the room. He heard it after it left his mouth. He didn't walk it back. Adrian studied him for a long moment. The man had a quality that Caleb recognized from his own most effective business negotiations. He asked the same question 3 times in different ways inside his own head before accepting any answer. He was doing that now. Sit down, Mr. Vossler, Adrian said finally. There are things you need to know, and some of them are going to be difficult to hear. Caleb sat down. Elena moved to the chair she'd been standing behind and sat down too, but not the way people sit when they're about to receive information. The way people sit when they've been carrying the information alone for a long time and are about to share the weight. Adrian did not soften what he told Caleb. He went through it in the systematic way of a man who deals in facts as a matter of operational survival. Elena's family, the Marlowe line on her mother's side, had controlled a private financial trust built over 3 generations, primarily through legitimate private investment and some historically gray area asset management that had been fully legitimized by the time Elena was born. The trust was structured to pass to Elena upon her 25th birthday, at which point it would become fully active under her management, It never activated. Because 6 months before Elena's 25th birthday, the people who wanted control of those assets, the network that Marcus Hale now represented, had made their first move. Elena's parents had died in what was recorded as a vehicle accident. Adrian's voice didn't change when he said this. Elena's face didn't either, which told Caleb that this particular wound had been dealt with, if not healed. She was 24, Adrian said. I had known her since she was 12. I was a business associate of her father's, and when he died, I made a choice to protect her. Not a clean or simple choice, the kind of choice that has costs. He paused. She went into a kind of managed disappearance. New name registered through legitimate channels. The trust went into an extended protective structure that required her active identification to unlock. As long as she remained technically unlocatable to the network, the asset stayed frozen. But they found her, Caleb said. They found the edges of her, Adrian said. They knew she was in this city. They didn't know her current identity or her location specifically. Marcus Hale got into your company because it was the most likely radius. I was looking. He spent 4 years looking. Did he find her? Caleb asked. He looked at Elena. Did Marcus know? Elena met his eyes. He suspected. He wasn't certain. 4 days ago, Adrian said, an associate inside the network obtained a piece of identification documentation that confirmed Elena's current identity. That is when I moved. He looked directly at Caleb. The divorce was already in motion at that point. Elena had made the calculation. She told you, Caleb said, about the divorce plan. She told me the timing, Adrian said. The rationale was her own. Caleb looked at Elena. He looked at her for long enough that it became uncomfortable in the way that real attention is sometimes uncomfortable. You were letting them confirm it was you, he said, so Adrian could catch them in the act of moving. A confirmed target who is cleanly divorced and has no obvious protector looks like an opportunity, Elena said. Greed doesn't wait when it sees an opening. And if they moved, you could identify them, out in the open, committed to an action. Evidence, she said, not suspicion, not corporate paper trails, actual evidence of intent and action, the kind that ends organizations rather than just inconveniences them. Caleb put his elbows on his knees and pressed his hands together and stared at the floor for a moment. The full architecture of it was assembling in his mind, and it was both brilliant and devastating in equal measure. She had allowed him to divorce her. She had let him feel like a man making a free choice. She had walked out of that courthouse in the rain without asking him for anything, not because she didn't want him to stay, but because she needed him to believe he had chosen to leave. Marcus is going to move soon, Caleb said. Within the week, Adrian confirmed. Now that the divorce is confirmed and Elena's location appears to have changed, the network will accelerate. They believe she's in transition, vulnerable. What are they going to do? Legal challenge to the trust structure, Elena said. They have a constructed claim to partial beneficiary status through a fraudulent family connection they've spent years building documentation for. If they file it in the right jurisdiction while I'm officially without counsel, without a legal address of record, without visible assets or support, it muddies the trust, Caleb said. It freezes it, she said. And a frozen trust under active legal challenge can be administered by a court-appointed trustee, which they will have already arranged. It was elegant and horrible, the way the worst things often are. What do you need? Caleb asked. Adrian and Elena looked at each other with the specific economy of people who have communicated in shorthand for years. The properties, Adrian said. The 7 Vossler Group properties Marcus connected to the network. 3 of them are being used as operational infrastructure. If we can document what's inside those buildings, what's being staged there, it establishes the criminal intent that tips this from a civil trust dispute into something the right authorities cannot ignore. I can get you into those buildings, Caleb said. They're my properties. They're currently under Marcus's operational authority within your company, Elena said carefully. He works for me, Caleb said. He has always worked for me. He just forgot that for a while. His jaw tightened. I'll remind him. The room went quiet. Outside the window, the lake sat still and dark under clouds that were building from the west, and somewhere in the distance there was the low sound of wind picking up across the water. Adrian Ravel looked at Caleb Vossler with the expression of a man updating a previous assessment, which in his world was not a small thing. You understand, Adrian said quietly, that when you walk back into your office and begin moving against Marcus, there is no walking it back. These people do not respond to negotiation or exposure threats. They respond to force or they respond to consequence. You are not a man who operates in those mechanisms. I built a 9-figure company, Caleb said. I operate in whatever mechanism is necessary. You build buildings, Adrian said. Not dismissive, clinical. This is different. Then teach me the difference, Caleb said, and let me be useful. Because right now I have inside access to those properties. I have a legitimate reason to inspect them without raising suspicion, and I have documentation connecting Marcus to the network that can be used the moment we have what we need from those buildings. He looked at Elena directly. You spent 3 years protecting me from people inside my own company. Let me return the favor. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was the most unguarded he had ever seen it, which was simultaneously the most and least like the woman he thought he'd known. If you go back and Marcus suspects anything, she said, he will not wait for the trust filing. He will move against you directly. I know. Caleb, I know, he said again, quieter. Elena, I know. She held his gaze. He held hers. Outside, the first sound of rain starting up again, a quiet percussion against the stone window sills. And in that room, something shifted that could not be unshifted, and the man who had signed his name without hesitating that morning. And the courthouse understood with complete clarity that he had just stepped through a door that had no handle on the other side. Caleb flew back alone. Adrian had offered resources, a driver, a secure communication line, a contact name he could use if things moved faster than expected. He had accepted the communication line and declined everything else, because arriving at his own company with Adrian Ravel's people around him would have told Marcus everything before Caleb had the chance to tell him nothing. The flight was 2 hours. He spent the first hour going over the property documents again on his laptop, memorizing the specific layout of the 3 warehouse buildings Adrian had flagged, mapping the access routes he knew from the original acquisition walkthroughs. He spent the second hour sitting very still with his hands flat on the tray table, thinking about Elena's face when she'd said, I know what I signed, and then immediately corrected herself because it had been him who said that. And for a moment she had spoken as though the two of them were the same person navigating the same problem. Maybe they had always been navigating the same problem, just from opposite ends of it, in rooms the other couldn't see into. He landed at 7 in the morning. He did not go home. He went directly to the office. Marcus Hale arrived at Vossler Group at 8:45, which was his standard time, and he came through the lobby with the unhurried confidence of a man who believes his position is secure. He was 51, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that read as trustworthy in photographs and in person. Open, slightly weathered, the face of a man who appeared to have nothing to hide precisely because he had spent years practicing how that face was supposed to look. Caleb was already at his desk when Marcus came up to the executive floor. He had arranged this deliberately. Sitting, jacket on, documents visible but not prominent, coffee untouched on the corner of the desk. A man already deep in his morning, unbothered. Marcus knocked on the open door. You're in early. Thought you'd take a day. Why would I take a day? After yesterday, the signing. Marcus came into the office and sat in the chair across from Caleb's desk without being invited, which was something he had always done, and which Caleb had always permitted because he'd read it as the comfort of someone with a long-established working relationship. He was reading it differently now. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Caleb said. Clean break, like Garrett said. Good. Marcus nodded, the practiced nod of a man performing genuine concern. She wasn't right for you. I know that's not what you want to hear the morning after, but I actually wanted to talk to you about the North Corridor properties, Caleb said. Easy. Transactional. I was looking at the Harmon Street warehouse last night, and I want to do a site walk this week. There are some structural questions I want to resolve before we move to the next phase. A very brief pause. A half-second that Caleb felt in his chest like a single drop of cold water. Sure, Marcus said. I can set that up. Which day works for you? Thursday, early morning, before the site crew gets in. I want to walk it quiet. Thursday morning, Marcus repeated. He was holding his expression perfectly, which was the tell. A man with nothing to hide doesn't have to hold anything. I'll have it arranged. Good. Caleb looked back at his screen. Green. That's all I needed. Marcus stood. He He moved toward the door with the same unhurried ease and stopped in the frame, and Caleb felt without looking up that he was being assessed. A quick, careful reading. "Anything else going on?" Marcus asked. "Nothing that can't wait," Caleb said. Marcus left. Caleb waited 90 seconds. Then he picked up his phone and sent a single text to the secure line Adrian's people had set up. "He's been notified. Clock starts now." The response came back in 4 minutes. "Understood. We have eyes on the Harmon Street property. There was movement there last night. Equipment being moved in. They may already be accelerating." Caleb read the message twice. Then he called Garrett into his office, closed the door, and told him everything. Garrett sat across from him and listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Garrett, who was a man of frequent useful interruptions. When Caleb finished, Garrett was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to have texture. "You went to England," Garrett said. "Yes." "You went to Adrian Ravel's estate in England and had a sit-down meeting." "That's accurate." "And now you're going to walk into a warehouse that a criminal network has been using as operational infrastructure and document what's inside." Garrett's voice was very level. "Using your legitimate property access as cover." "Also accurate." "And you didn't think to mention any of this to me before you booked the flight." Caleb met his eyes. "I'm mentioning it now." Garrett pressed 2 fingers to his forehead. "Right, okay. So what do you need from me?" "I need you to pull every piece of documentation on Marcus's involvement in the North Corridor acquisitions and have it in a format that can be handed to the right people quickly. Not emailed. Physical copies in a secure location outside this building." "Done. What else?" "I need you to find out if Marcus has made any calls or sent any communications in the last 12 hours that he routed outside the company's standard channels." Caleb paused. "He has a secondary phone. I've seen it twice in the last year and didn't register it as significant at the time." Garrett's jaw tightened. "I know someone in IT security who owes me a conversation. Don't do anything that puts you in a compromised position." "Little late for that worry," Garrett said, and stood up. The next 48 hours moved with the particular slowness of hours that contain too much potential energy. Caleb went to meetings. He signed documents. He sat in a budget review on Tuesday afternoon and discussed Q3 projections while across the table. Marcus Hale reviewed the same spreadsheets and asked sharp, reasonable questions and looked at every moment like exactly what he had always appeared to be. It was the most difficult professional performance of Caleb's life, and he had negotiated contracts under conditions that had made other men crack. Tuesday night, Garrett sent him a message. Secondary phone activity confirmed. 3 outgoing calls in the last 24 hours to a number registered to a logistics company in Frankfurt. The logistics company shares a registered director with one of the shell entities in your North Corridor documentation. Caleb read the message in his car outside his building and then sat with the engine running for several minutes in the dark. They were moving. Not at Thursday's timeline. Now. He called the secure line. One of Adrian's people picked up, a woman with a clipped, efficient voice who identified herself only as a coordinator. "The network is already in motion," Caleb said. "Marcus has been in contact with Frankfurt in the last 24 hours. If they're accelerating the trust filing, it could happen before Thursday." "We're aware," she said. "Adrian is in the city. He arrived this afternoon." Caleb hadn't expected that. "Does Elena know?" "Elena is with him." Something shifted in his chest. Relief, then something adjacent to fear, because if Adrian had brought Elena here, then the situation was moving faster than any of them had planned for. "What's happening?" he asked. "Mr. Ravel will contact you tomorrow morning," the coordinator said. "Please don't go to the Harmon Street property before then." "Why?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be concerning. "Because there are people in that building tonight who were not there yesterday, and they are not construction crew." The line went quiet. "I went to the property anyway." Not inside. He was not reckless enough for that. Or rather, he was, but he was also capable of overriding recklessness with the same precision he applied to everything else. He drove past the Harmon Street warehouse at 11:15 at night and slowed without stopping and looked. The building was dark from the outside. No visible light in the upper windows. The loading dock on the south side showed a truck backed up against it. A plain white truck with no visible markings. 2 men at the dock, moving something between the truck and the building's interior, both working without flashlights. which meant the interior was lit well enough to work by without needing additional light, which meant the building had been wired for power, not the standard construction phase temporary wiring that the project documents described, but something more permanent. He drove around the block and came back past the north face of the building. There was a second vehicle he hadn't seen from the other angle, a dark sedan parked without lights in the access alley. Someone in the driver's seat. He kept driving. He did not stop. He went home and he sat in his apartment and he thought about what kind of infrastructure requires that level of setup, that level of concealment, that level of people working at midnight. He thought about the 7 properties, the connected shell companies, the years of patient positioning. He thought about Elena at 24 years old, her parents newly dead, Adrian Ravel making a choice that had costs, his words, and the particular kind of silence that settles over a person who has learned to survive by becoming invisible. He did not sleep. Adrian called at 6. "Change of plan," he said. No preamble. Caleb sat up from the couch where he'd spent the night half horizontal with his shoes still on. What happened? The trust filing was submitted last night, not Thursday. Last night at 11:40 to a private commercial court in a jurisdiction where they have a sitting judge in their influence. Adrian's voice was controlled in the way that very dangerous men's voices are controlled when they are containing something that would be destructive if released. The judge granted an emergency freeze on the trust assets as of midnight. Caleb was on his feet. They moved early. They moved because they were warned. The sentence landed in the room like something physical. What do you mean, warned? Someone told them we were planning to move Thursday, Adrian said. Someone who knew Thursday was the timeline. Caleb's mind ran through every person who had known about Thursday. Adrian's team, Elena, Garrett, and himself. That's not possible, Caleb said. The only people who knew— I know who knew, Adrian said. That's why I'm calling you directly and not through the coordinator. The implication hit him like cold water. Not Garrett. He would not accept Garrett. He pushed the thought away and immediately pulled it back because a man who had already been wrong once about someone in his inner circle could not afford to dismiss the possibility a second time. Tell me what you know, Caleb said. The Frankfurt call from Marcus Hale's secondary phone on Tuesday night, Adrian said. We intercepted the content. Marcus told them that Caleb Vossler had made contact with our organization. He told them that Vossler was planning to access the Harmon Street property on Thursday morning. And he told them that Elena Marlowe was no longer under their radar, that she had active protection and an ally inside Vossler Group who had documentation. He knew, Caleb said. He knew I'd found out. He knew within 12 hours of your return from England. Caleb turned this over. The office visit Wednesday morning. The conversation about Thursday. Marcus sitting across from him with that perfectly held expression, and Caleb went back through the conversation with the specific clarity of a man replaying footage frame by frame. Marcus had asked, "Anything else going on?" He hadn't been performing concern. He had been fishing, testing, checking what Caleb knew and how much of it showed on his face, and Caleb had believed he'd given nothing away. I was played, Caleb said. The words tasted the way they deserved to taste. You were assessed, Adrian corrected, and the assessment told Marcus enough. He didn't need you to confess. He needed to see whether you were the same man he'd been managing for 5 years, or whether you'd become something else. A pause. You've become something else. He saw it. Where's Elena? Caleb asked. Here with me. She knows about the filing. How is she? A brief pause that had something in it. Caleb couldn't quite read through a phone line. She is doing what she always does, which is processing it in a way that looks like calm and is not entirely calm. I need to see her. We're at the Meridian, room 1114. Come now, and come clean. Don't stop at your office. Don't contact Garrett until we've spoken. There's a reason for that. The line went dead before Caleb could ask what the reason was. Elena was standing at the window when Caleb came into the hotel room, and Adrian was seated at the table with 2 other people Caleb didn't recognize. A man with a laptop open in front of him, and a woman with a phone pressed to her ear who was speaking in low, rapid French. Elena turned when Caleb came in. She looked at him for a second before she spoke, and the look did something to the temperature of the room. Garrett Wynne made a call, she said. Last night at 9:53. To Marcus Hale's personal number, not the secondary phone. his registered personal cell. Caleb stood in the doorway. He did not move. That's not, he started. 12 minutes long, she said. 12 minutes, Caleb. 3 minutes before Marcus made the Frankfurt call. The floor did not move. It felt like it did. Everything solid in Caleb's understanding of the last 48 hours shifted under him, and he stood in the doorway of a hotel room and held completely still because moving felt like it might accelerate something he wasn't ready to have arrive. Garrett. Garrett, who had been with him for 9 years. Garrett, who picked up at 3 in the morning. Garrett, who had booked the flight to England, who had known the England trip was happening, who had been given everything Caleb found the night before Elena left, and had therefore known everything, the properties, the shell companies, the 7 links, the Thursday plan. Garrett, who had asked, the morning Caleb returned, "What do you need from me?" Because that was what Garrett always asked. But Caleb heard it now in a different register, with a different understanding of who was asking and on behalf of what interest. "How long?" Caleb said. His voice came out completely flat. "We're working on that," Adrian said from the table. "The call pattern suggests this was not a single incident. There have been at least 3 prior contacts in the last 2 months. He told Marcus I went to England." "Within hours," Elena confirmed. Caleb walked fully into the room and closed the door behind him and stood with his back to it. His hands were at his sides. He was aware of them in the specific way you become aware of your hands when you don't know what to do with them. 9 years. Garrett Wynn had been with him since the early days of the company, when Vossler Group had been 2 people in a borrowed office space and a concept. He had watched the company grow. He had done the work, genuine work. Caleb had not imagined that, could not have fabricated 5 years of effective assistance, of loyalty, of being the person in every difficult room who understood what Caleb needed before Caleb said it. But unless that had been something else, unless that level of understanding had a different origin than loyalty. "Was he planted?" Caleb asked. "When he came to me 9 years ago. Was that arranged?" Adrian and Elena exchanged a look. "We don't know yet," Adrian said. "It's possible he was genuine for years and was turned more recently. It's also possible the timeline is longer." He paused. "I'm sorry. I know this is—" "Don't," Caleb said. "Just tell me what we're working with." The man at this laptop spoke for the first time. "The trust filing is the immediate problem. The freeze is active. Elena's legal counsel is already mounting a challenge, but in the jurisdiction they filed in, the standard timeline for a challenge review is 30 to 60 days. He looked up from the screen. In 30 to 60 days, the court-appointed trustee takes provisional administrative control. The network's candidate for that position was submitted along with the filing. So in 30 days, they have what they've spent years trying to get," Caleb said. "Unless we can provide evidence of criminal coordination to a law enforcement body with the authority to supersede the commercial court's jurisdiction," the man said, "which requires the documentation from the warehouse properties plus documented evidence of the trust fraud. Together, they constitute a case. Separately, neither is sufficient. And the warehouse properties are now on high alert because Marcus knows we were planning to go there Thursday," Elena said. "Whatever they were moving in last night, they'll either have completed it by now or they'll be accelerating." Caleb looked at her. "What were they moving in?" She hesitated. "Not long." "Documents. Physical records of the fraudulent beneficiary claim they used for the trust filing. They've been constructing that paper trail for years and it exists physically, not digital. It can't be remotely accessed or destroyed. It has to be physically present somewhere," she paused. "We believe Harmon Street is where it's being consolidated." "Why there?" "Because it's a building you own," Adrian said quietly. "If the records are found there, the initial implication is that Vossler Group is complicit in the fraud. It muddies the evidentiary picture enough to delay any law enforcement action against the network while the trust proceedings continue." The depth of it settled over Caleb like something heavy and cold. They were going to frame him, not clumsily, not obviously, but carefully, using his own properties, his own company's footprint, to create enough ambiguity that the authorities would spend weeks investigating Vossler Group, while the network walked away with Elena's inheritance behind a court order. Marcus had not just been working against Elena. He had been positioning Caleb as the collateral damage, a man holding a bag he didn't know he was holding. "When did they finish consolidating at Harmon Street?" Caleb asked. "If they were working last night, possibly by tonight," the laptop man said. After that, the records are staged. They can be discovered at any point they choose. Then we have today, Caleb said. Caleb, Elena's voice was sharp. You cannot walk into that building. They know you know. If you show up there today, I'm not walking in, he said. I'm not doing anything that looks like what they expect me to do. He moved from the door toward the table, and something in how he moved made the laptop man sit back slightly without appearing to intend to. Marcus thinks he's been managing me for 5 years. He thinks I'm the same variable he calculated when he made that call last night. He told them I'd become something else, but he doesn't know yet what that something else looks like or what it's capable of. He looked at Adrian. What do you need from me? Specifically. Right now. Today. Adrian looked at him for a long moment. There is one thing, Adrian said carefully, that could change the timeline on the trust challenge. Elena's physical testimony, combined with a specific piece of identifying documentation that only she can provide, filed in the primary jurisdiction, not the one the network chose, but the one where the trust was originally established, can trigger an automatic administrative stay. It doesn't resolve anything, but it freezes their freeze. It buys time. What's the documentation? Caleb asked. It has to be filed in person, Elena said, in Brussels. The original trust was established through a Belgian institution, and the primary jurisdiction clause is in the founding documents. If I appear in person at that institution with the identifying verification, they are legally required to issue the stay. When? Within 24 hours of the competing filing, Adrian said, which means by midnight tonight. Caleb looked at the window. The city outside was gray and moving with the ordinary business of a Wednesday morning, entirely indifferent. How long is the flight to Brussels? With the right aircraft, 90 minutes, Adrian said. But if Marcus is watching your movements, and he is, and he sees you leave the country again today, he will know the Brussels play is in motion. He has contacts in the Belgian commercial system. He will move to block her appearance. So I can't go, Caleb said. My going confirms it. Your going confirms it, Adrian agreed. Then I stay, Caleb said, and I give Marcus something to watch. He looked at Elena. She was watching him with the same unguarded expression she'd had in the estate sitting room in England, the look of a woman who was revising something carefully in real time. You stay, she said slowly, and do what? I call Marcus, Caleb said. I tell him I know about Garrett. I tell him I'm furious, that I feel betrayed, that I want to meet and I want answers. I give him a reason to be in a room with me at noon today, which means he is not watching an airport or a Belgian institution or anything except the conversation I'm having with him. Elena opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Adrian. It's not a bad play, the laptop man said quietly. It's a dangerous one, Elena said. If Marcus thinks you're accusing him of something, I'm not accusing him of anything, Caleb said. I'm accusing Garrett, which is true. And Marcus will see me as a man who's discovered a betrayal inside his own camp and is spiraling, which is close enough to true that I can sell it. He paused. I've been in rooms with men who were trying to read me for 30 years. I know how to give them what they're looking for. Elena looked at him for a long moment. If this goes wrong, she said, and stopped. It won't. You don't know that. No, he said. I don't. But if we don't do something in the next 8 hours, by midnight, your trust is on a 30-day countdown to being controlled by the people who killed your parents. The room went very still. He had not meant to say it like that. He had meant to be more careful, more measured. But it was out now, in the air of the room, and Elena's face did something he had never seen her face do in 3 years of living beside her. It cracked. Not tears, not collapse. Something smaller and more fundamental than either of those. A flinching, a brief, involuntary exposure of the thing that lived underneath all the composure and the planning and the years of making herself invisible. The thing that was just a woman who had lost her parents at 24 and had been running ever since. She turned back toward the window. Caleb did not move toward her. He understood instinctively that this was not a moment she wanted to be touched. Adrian looked at Caleb with an expression that was new. Something between acknowledgement and warning. The look of a man who has been the primary protector of someone for a very long time and is recalibrating what that means. Make the call to Marcus, Adrian said quietly. We'll be in the air within the hour. Caleb pulled out his phone. His hands were steady. He did not understand why they were steady. By every measure, everything had just gotten significantly worse. He found Marcus Hale's contact in his phone and pressed call, and while it rang, he looked at the back of Elena's head at the window and the way she was holding her shoulders, very straight, very controlled, the way a person holds themselves when they are refusing to let their body do what it wants to do. Marcus picked up on the third ring. "Caleb," he said, warm, easy. "I need you to meet me," Caleb said. His voice came out exactly right, tight, wound up, the sound of a man trying to hold something together that is coming apart. "Somewhere private, not the office." A very brief pause. "Everything okay?" "No," Caleb said. "It's Garrett. I found something and I need to talk it through with someone I trust, and right now you're the only person I have." The silence on the line lasted exactly 2 seconds, and inside those 2 seconds Caleb felt, with every calibrated instinct he'd spent a career developing, the precise moment when Marcus Hale decided he had his man exactly where he wanted him. "Of course," Marcus said. "Whatever you need. I'm here." And in the window across the room, Elena's reflection watched Caleb's face with an expression that was no longer cracked. It had re-solidified into something harder and more purposeful than anything he had seen from her yet. And he understood that whatever she had allowed herself to feel for those few seconds, she had now put back behind her teeth where she kept everything important, and she was going to Brussels, and she was going to walk into that institution, and she was going to do what she had always done: survive. But this time, for the first time, she was not doing it alone. Caleb chose a restaurant 3 blocks from the office. Not neutral territory. There was no neutral territory anymore, and pretending otherwise would have been a waste of energy he didn't have. He chose it because it had a back room that he had used for private lunches before, because the owner knew him well enough to arrange the space without asking questions, and because it had 2 exits that were not the front door. He arrived 20 minutes early. He ordered coffee he didn't drink. He sat with his back to the wall and his phone face down on the table, and he ran the performance through his head one more time, the way he ran acquisition pitches. Not word for word, but emotionally, finding the truth inside the constructed thing, because the best performances are never entirely constructed. He was genuinely angry. That was real. He was genuinely exhausted. That was real. He had genuinely been betrayed by someone he trusted, and though the betrayal he was about to describe to Marcus was Garrett's and not Marcus's own, the feeling underneath was the same feeling, and feelings were what Marcus would be reading. He watched the front entrance through the frosted glass partition. He watched Marcus come through the door at 12:03, scan the room, find him, and cross toward him with the walk of a man who has already decided how this conversation ends. Marcus sat down. He looked at Caleb's face for 3 full seconds before speaking. "You look like you haven't slept," Marcus said. "I haven't," Caleb said. "Tell me what happened." Caleb leaned forward. He put both forearms on the table and he let his voice go to the place where control phrase at the edges, where the effort of holding things together shows through. "I asked Garrett to pull records on the North Corridor properties Monday night," he said. "The acquisition documentation, the permit histories. He said he would." He paused. Let the pause do something. "Last night I found out he called you." Marcus's face moved through something very fast. Not panic. Marcus was too experienced for panic, but a rapid internal calculation, the kind that happens behind the eyes while the face is still composing its response. "Called me?" Marcus said. Careful. Measured. "Your personal cell. 9:53. 12 minutes. Caleb held his gaze. "I need to know what he told you and why he was talking to you instead of coming to me." Another calculation. Caleb felt it in the half-second delay, in the way Marcus's hand settled flat on the table, in the very slight adjustment of his weight that looked like relaxation and was actually repositioning. "He called me because he was worried about you," Marcus said. His voice was perfectly calibrated, concerned, slightly reluctant, the voice of a man being pulled into something he didn't seek out. "He said you'd come back from somewhere. He didn't say where, and you were asking questions that he didn't understand. I was worried you were in some kind of trouble." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him to keep an eye on you and let me know if anything escalated." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Caleb, what kind of trouble are you in?" It was good. Caleb gave him that internally. It was a genuinely good redirect, Flip the position, establish Marcus as the concerned party, make Caleb's investigation of his own employee look like the alarming behavior. I don't know yet, Caleb said. That's why I needed to talk to you. He watched Marcus absorb this, the small easing of something in his shoulders, the decision, visible only in retrospect, to believe he had the situation managed. Walk me through it, Marcus said, from the beginning. And Caleb did. He walked him through a version of it, partial truths arranged like furniture in a room designed to look like the whole room, with the most important things placed behind doors that appeared to be walls. He talked about Garrett's call. He talked about feeling like something was off in the North Corridor documentation. He talked about his own instincts firing and not knowing what they were firing at. He did not mention Brussels. He did not mention the trust filing. He did not mention Elena. He watched Marcus listen, and he watched Marcus believe him, and the specific quality of that belief, the relief inside it, the small expansion of confidence that came from a man who thinks he's been handed control of the narrative, was the most sickening thing Caleb had felt in recent memory. 9 years. He kept his hands still. He kept his voice in the register of a man asking for help. He stayed in the room until 1:15, when Marcus put a hand on his shoulder and told him they'd figure it out together, that Garrett would be dealt with, that Caleb should go home and get some sleep, and let Marcus handle the next steps. Caleb said thank you. He meant nothing. He walked out of the restaurant and around the corner and into an alley where he stood with one hand against the brick and breathed through his nose until the nausea passed. His phone buzzed. The secure line. A single word from Adrian's coordinator. Airborne. Elena was in the air. He pushed off the wall and straightened his jacket and walked back toward the office like a man who had just had a reassuring lunch with a trusted colleague, because Marcus's people were almost certainly watching, and the performance was not over. It lasted until 3:47 in the afternoon. Caleb was at his desk when the fire alarm in the Harmon Street warehouse triggered. He knew this because the building's monitoring system was linked to the Vossler Group operations dashboard, which Caleb had pulled up on his secondary screen under the guise of reviewing project timelines. The alarm lasted 4 seconds and then went silent, manually reset, which meant someone inside the building had triggered and then killed it, which meant someone inside the building had made a mistake and then corrected it, which meant people were inside the building doing something that required enough activity to accidentally trigger a heat sensor. He texted the secure line, "Activity confirmed at Harmon Street. They're working fast." The response came back in 2 minutes, not from the coordinator. From Adrian directly. "We know. We have visual. They're consolidating faster than projected. How much time can you buy?" Caleb looked across the open floor toward Marcus's office. Marcus was on the phone. His back was partially to the glass, but Caleb could see the angle of his shoulders and the specific stillness of a man in a tense conversation. He typed back, working on it. "What's Elena's status?" 3 minutes passed. 4. 5. On approach to Brussels. 40 minutes out. 40 minutes. He needed 40 minutes plus however long the institution's process took. Adrian had said the filing itself required physical presence and biometric verification and the presentation of the original trust identification document, which Elena carried on her person at all times in a format that Adrian had described only as not digital and not easily replicated. He needed an hour minimum. Probably 90 minutes. He looked at Marcus's office again. Marcus was off the phone now. He was looking at his screen with an expression that Caleb could read from 30 feet through glass. It was the expression of a man receiving information he had not expected. Someone had told Marcus something. Caleb picked up his desk phone, the landline, the internal system, and called Marcus's extension. Marcus picked up immediately. "Yeah." "My car's getting serviced," Caleb said. "Can I get a ride to the Harmon Street site? I want to do a quick walk this afternoon. Look at the structural questions before Thursday's formal visit. Shouldn't take more than an hour." A pause. Not long. Not long enough to be suspicious on its own, but Caleb had been reading the pauses in Marcus Hale's responses for 2 days now, and he felt the quality of this one like a change in air pressure. "Tonight might be better," Marcus said. "Site crew's still there this afternoon." "I thought the crew was on modified hours this week." Another pause. "Let me check the schedule and call you back." "Sure," Caleb said. "I'll be here." He hung up and immediately pulled the operations dashboard back up. The Harmon Street building monitor showed the alarm system had been reset to passive mode. Someone had deliberately taken it offline, which meant whatever was happening inside the building, they no longer wanted the monitoring system recording it. He picked up his cell and called the secure line voice option. Adrian's coordinator picked up. "They've taken the building's alarm system offline," he said quietly. "Whatever they're staging in there, they're finishing it now. Not tonight. Now." "Understood. We're repositioning." "How many people do you have on the building?" "Enough." The coordinator's voice was flat and certain in a way that Caleb recognized as the sound of professional competence in a field he did not operate in. "Mr. Vossler, your role right now is to stay in that office and keep Marcus Hale's attention on you. Can you do that for 90 minutes? "I can do that." "Don't go to Harmon Street. Whatever you're thinking, don't." He hung up. He sat in his office for 6 minutes and 30 seconds. He watched Marcus's office through the glass. Marcus was on his phone again, standing this time, with his back fully turned. At the 6-minute 30-second mark, Caleb's cell buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Vossler." A male voice, unfamiliar, with the flat affect of someone reading from a prepared position. "My name is not important. What is important is that you understand your current situation clearly. Elena Marlowe's flight was diverted 20 minutes ago to an alternate airfield outside Liège. She is safe and unharmed. She will remain that way as long as you and your associates do not take any further action regarding the Harmon Street property or the Brussels institution. You have 1 hour to communicate this to Adrian Ravel." Caleb's blood went somewhere cold and deep. "I want to speak to her," he said. "That's not—" "I want to speak to her," he said again. His voice didn't rise, it went the other direction. Down and very quiet, the way his voice went when he was most dangerous in a negotiation, which was when he stopped performing certainty and simply inhabited it. "Right now, or this conversation is over and I start making calls." A pause. Movement on the line. Then Elena's voice. "I'm fine." Clipped, controlled. He could hear the effort in the control. "Are you hurt?" "No?" "Caleb, don't—" Her voice cut off, like the phone had been moved. The flat male voice returned. 1 hour, Mr. Vossler." The line went dead. Caleb sat absolutely still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he stood up, walked to his office door, opened it, and crossed the floor to Marcus Hale's office in 15 steps. He opened Marcus's door without knocking. Marcus turned from his window. His phone was in his hand. His expression did the thing that well-prepared faces do when something unexpected happens. It assembled into concern a half-second too late. "Caleb." "They have Elena," Caleb said. He closed the door behind him. "And you're going to tell me right now where she is." The concern on Marcus's face didn't collapse. It shifted, very slightly, into something that was its own kind of tell. Not guilt, not alarm. The specific expression of a man deciding how much of his hand to show. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said. "Yes, you do." Caleb moved further into the office. I was aware of his own body in a way that was unusual. The specific weight of his hands, the temperature of the room, the 3 feet of carpet between where he stood and where Marcus stood. "You've been running a play against Elena Marlowe's family trust for 4 years using my company as your infrastructure. You've been feeding information about my movements to the network you work for. You compromised Garrett Wynn and used him to track what I knew. And an hour ago, your people diverted a private aircraft and took Elena off it." Marcus looked at him. The performance of concern was gone now. What replaced it was something considerably more honest and considerably less comfortable to be in a room with. "You've been busy," Marcus said. "Tell me where she is." "I don't make those calls, Caleb." His voice was different now, still controlled, but the warmth had been removed, and what was underneath was a kind of flat professional candor that was somehow worse than hostility. "I don't control those logistics. I'm a facilitator." "A facilitator," Caleb repeated. "I connect resources to opportunities. That's what I've always done. For you, for others. The work isn't different. The client is." "The client murdered Elena's parents." Something moved across Marcus's face. Not remorse. More like the slight discomfort of a man who prefers not to think about certain downstream consequences of his work. "I don't know anything about that." "You know enough," Caleb said. "You know what they want, and you spent 4 years building the infrastructure for them to get it. That makes you responsible for everything that comes attached." "That's a very moralistic position," Marcus said. For a man who signed a building acquisition without reading the subsidiary documentation. It landed. Caleb let it land because deflecting it would have cost him more than absorbing it. "You're right," he said. "I didn't read it. I trusted you. That's on me." He took one step forward. "Now tell me how to reach the people who have her, or tell me where that aircraft was diverted to, or give me something I can use in the next 50 minutes. And if I don't? Then I take everything I have to the Financial Crimes Division and the Commercial Fraud Task Force and every relevant authority I can reach in the next hour, and I burn down every piece of infrastructure your people have built in this city, starting with the Harmon Street property." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "And Elena?" "Elena can take care of herself," Caleb said. "She's been doing it longer than either of us." He held Marcus's gaze. "But I would prefer not to test that right now. So give me something." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. A real assessment this time. Not the managed reading of a man taking stock of a useful asset, but the genuine calculation of a person deciding whether a situation has changed enough to require a different response. "There's an airfield," Marcus said fine. "Private. Outside Liège. The aircraft was rerouted there because a filing in Brussels was anticipated and the goal was to delay." He paused. "She's being held in the aircraft. They won't move her. Moving her creates a criminal liability that the network prefers to avoid. They want the delay, not a kidnapping charge." "How many people?" "On the aircraft? 4. At the airfield, 2 more. Armed?" "Professionally cautious," Marcus said, which was not an answer and was also completely an answer. Caleb pulled out his phone. He sent the airfield information to the secure line in a text that took him 11 seconds to type. "You understand," Marcus said, watching him, "that this doesn't change the trust filing. The freeze is active. Even if you get her to Brussels tonight, the window closes at midnight, and the institution's administrative process takes 30 minutes, Caleb said. "If the right documentation is presented in person before midnight, the stay issues in 30 minutes. I checked." He met Marcus's eyes. "I've been busy." Something changed in Marcus's expression. The professional flatness acquired a new quality. Not quite respect, which would have been too human a word for what passed between them, but a kind of recalibration, the recognition of an opponent. "What happens to me?" Marcus asked. "That's not my decision," Caleb said. "But I'd start thinking about what you know that the authorities would consider valuable, because the network you work for is going to spend the next several months looking for someone to hold responsible for losing this play, and you're the most visible option." He left Marcus's office without closing the door. He was in the elevator before his phone buzzed. "Adrian, airfield confirmed. We're moving. Keep your phone on." Caleb stepped out of the elevator into the lobby and walked through the building's front doors into the afternoon and felt the cold air hit his face and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his eyes closed. 53 minutes to midnight in Brussels. He opened his eyes and flagged a cab. "I went to the Harmon Street warehouse." He knew he wasn't supposed to. He knew the coordinator had told him not to, and he knew Adrian's people were already repositioning, and he knew that showing up at a building where a criminal network was staging fraudulent documentation was not what a man who was supposed to be providing a distraction should do. He went anyway, because Elena was at an airfield in Belgium with 4 armed people on an aircraft, and he needed to do something with his hands. The building's main entrance was locked, but it was his building and he had a key and he used it. The lobby was dark. The freight elevator was running. He could hear the mechanism somewhere above him, which meant it was being used, which meant people were still working the upper floors. He took the stairs. The second floor was empty. Third floor? He opened the stairwell door and looked down a long corridor that was lit by temporary industrial lights strung along the ceiling. And at the far end of the corridor, 2 men were moving between 2 open rooms with the focused efficiency of people completing a job against a deadline. Caleb did not have a weapon. He was a businessman in a charcoal suit in a building he owned. He walked down the corridor. The first man saw him at 30 feet and stopped moving. The second man looked up from the box he was carrying. "Building's closed," the first man said. Eastern European accent. He was Caleb's height, broader, and had the specific build of someone who was carrying more than documents. "I own the building," Caleb said, without slowing. "Sir." The man moved to intercept. Caleb's phone rang. He held up one finger. An absurd gesture, a boardroom gesture, a gesture completely wrong for the situation and somehow exactly right. because it was so confident in its wrongness that the man actually hesitated. He answered the phone. Adrian's voice very tight. "What are you doing?" "I'm on the third floor of the Harmon Street property," Caleb said conversationally, looking at the man in front of him. "There are two people here completing what appears to be a document consolidation operation." "Caleb, Elena, what's her status?" "We're 20 minutes out from the airfield, but if you do anything in that building that spooks the network—" "I'm not doing anything," Caleb said. "I'm standing in my building looking at boxes." He looked at the first man, who was now doing the calculation of a person who has encountered a situation that wasn't in his briefing and is waiting for guidance. "I just wanted to see it for myself." The phone was quiet for a moment. 20 minutes, Adrian said. "Then I need you out of that building." "Understood." He hung up. He looked at the two men in the corridor and then at the open room to his right, where stacked boxes filled most of the floor space. Brown archive boxes, the kind used for legal document storage, each one sealed and labeled in a handwriting he couldn't read at this distance. Years of fabricated paper. The claim they had built to steal what Elena's family had spent 3 generations building. "I'm going to need you both to step back from those boxes," Caleb said. The first man looked at him steadily. "That's not something you should ask." "This is my property," Caleb said. "Those are objects inside my property. If you attempt to remove them, you're committing theft from the registered owner of this building, which I can document and report in real time." He held up his phone. "I'm already recording this conversation. Everything that's happened in the last 4 minutes is on a file being transmitted to an external server. So you can step back, or you can be the 2 men on camera who were caught removing evidence from a crime scene." He let that settle. "Your call." Neither man moved for 5 seconds. Then the first man took 1 step back. Then the second. Caleb walked to the open room doorway. He looked at the boxes. He took his phone and photographed the room methodically. Walls, floor, boxes, labels, the serial markings on the temporary lighting rigs, everything. Because photographs were evidence, and evidence was the only currency that mattered right now. His phone buzzed. Text from the secure line. "Airfield. Aircraft secured. She's out." He read it twice. He lowered the phone. He stood in a 3rd-floor room in a building he owned, surrounded by years of fraudulent documentation built to steal a dead woman's legacy from her daughter. And the 2 men in the corridor behind him were very still and very watchful. And somewhere outside Liège, an aircraft had just been secured by Adrian Ravel's people, and Elena Marlowe was standing on a Belgian airfield with 43 minutes left before midnight, and she was out. He turned around. He looked at the 2 men. "I need to make a call," he said. His voice was remarkably steady. "I'd appreciate some quiet." He called Adrian. "She needs to move right now. 40 minutes. "She's moving," Adrian said. And then, after a beat, "She wants to talk to you." A transfer, a brief sound of wind. She was outside, moving fast. "Caleb." Her voice was different from the aircraft call, still controlled, but something in it was warm in a way that the phone's compression couldn't entirely flatten. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I'm at Harmon Street." A pause. "Of course you are." And in those 4 words and the tone underneath them, was something he hadn't heard from her in 3 years of marriage, possibly ever. Something that was not gratitude and not softness and not approval exactly, but was in the territory of all 3. Something that said, "I see you," the actual you, not the version I'd written off. "Go to Brussels," he said. "Don't talk to me again until you're in that institution. You should leave that building. I'll leave when I'm done here." "Caleb, Brussels," he said. "Go." A brief silence. "Okay," she said. The line went quiet. He lowered the phone and looked at the 2 men in the corridor who had not moved, who were watching him with the calculating patience of people waiting for the shape of a situation to become clear enough to respond to. Down the corridor, the freight elevator engaged. Moving up. Someone coming. The first man's eyes moved towards the elevator. A flicker of communication passed between the 2 men that Caleb caught and filed. They were not waiting for orders from whoever was in the elevator. They were waiting to see whether they needed to do something before that person arrived, which meant whoever was in that elevator was not their superior, which meant their superior was communicating with them some other way, which meant they had already been given instructions that the elevator's arrival was about to complicate. Caleb looked at his phone. 38 minutes to midnight. He looked at the boxes. He looked at the two men. The elevator reached the third floor, and the doors opened, and Marcus Hale walked into the corridor, still in his office clothes, with his jacket slightly open and his expression doing something that Caleb had never seen on it in 5 years. Not the performance of concern, not the managed warmth, not the flat professional candor from the office. Raw alarm. Marcus Hale was afraid, not of Caleb. His eyes went past Caleb to the boxes in the room, then to the two men. And what Caleb read in the rapid calculation crossing his face was the specific fear of a man who has realized that the situation has moved beyond the point where his usefulness to the network protects him. "They're pulling out," Marcus said to the two men. Not to Caleb, to the two men. "Right now. Everything in the truck, we move in 10 minutes. The first man looked at Caleb. "He doesn't leave," Marcus said, still not looking at Caleb, as though by not looking he could keep the sentence from being what it was. Caleb felt the temperature of the corridor change. "Marcus," he said. Marcus finally looked at him. The fear was still there, underneath everything, but the professional mask had come back down over it. Not perfectly, the edges were showing, but enough to function. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. And it was possible, listening to the specific quality of those two words, that he meant some partial version of them. "This was always going to end one way. You just moved faster than anyone expected." "It's not ended yet," Caleb said. "Caleb," Marcus's voice dropped, almost private. "Walk out of this building. Take your documentation. Take your photographs. Go file whatever you're going to file. But walk out now, before the next 10 minutes happen. Because what happens in the next 10 minutes is not something you're equipped for, and I cannot—" He stopped, reorganized. "I cannot control what these people do when they're under pressure." The first man had moved. Not toward Caleb, toward the boxes. He was lifting one. The second man had moved to the room's secondary access, a connecting door that Caleb hadn't noticed, which now stood open to an adjacent space. They were not stopping because Caleb was there. They had never been going to stop because Caleb was there. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the man lifting the box. He looked at his phone. 36 minutes. And he did the arithmetic of the situation with the same speed he applied to acquisition deals, where the numbers either worked or they didn't, and sentimentality was the most expensive mistake you could make. He stepped directly in front of the man with the box. "Put it down," he said. The man looked at him, set the box on the floor with deliberate care, as though the box itself were not the issue, and then, in the same motion, straightened and looked at Caleb with the flat, steady gaze of someone who has been told to do a job and is doing it regardless of what stands in the way. Caleb's phone rang. He didn't take his eyes off the man. He answered it. The coordinator's voice. "Get out of the building, right now. We have people 30 seconds out, and they need you clear of the entrance." "How many are coming?" "Enough. Out. Now." The man in front of him reached past him toward the box. Caleb grabbed the man's forearm. What happened next was very fast and not elegant, and left Caleb on the floor of the corridor with his shoulder against the wall and a sharp, specific pain radiating from his left side where he'd hit the doorframe, and the man standing over him was saying something in a language Caleb didn't speak, and Marcus was across the corridor with his hands slightly out, the universal gesture of a man trying to keep a situation from escalating past a point he can explain later. Caleb breathed through the pain. Assessed. Nothing broken. He was reasonably sure nothing was broken. He heard the stairwell door open at the end of the corridor. Then another door. Then the freight elevator again. Then the corridor was very loud and very crowded and full of people who were not building crew, and the two men who had been moving boxes were no longer moving boxes. And Marcus Hale was standing against the wall with his hands raised and an expression of total and complete resignation. Caleb sat on the floor of his own building with his back against the wall and his left side hurting and his phone still in his hand, and he looked at the boxes in the room and the people now moving through the corridor, and he thought, with the specific clarity that sometimes arrives in the aftermath of physical impact, the boxes are still here. They hadn't moved the boxes. Every box was still in that room. He checked his phone. 34 minutes. He pressed his palm against the wall and pushed himself upright. His shoulder protested. He ignored it. One of Adrian's people, a compact woman in dark clothing who moved like someone who had done this before in rooms exactly like this one, looked at him as he stood. "You need to clear the floor," she said. The boxes don't leave this room, Caleb said. They're not going anywhere. She looked at him the way people look at civilians in operational situations. Not unkind, but absolutely certain about the hierarchy. Now please clear the floor. He cleared the floor. He took the stairs down and came out into the evening air, and the street was different now. Two vehicles he hadn't seen when he arrived, parked with the engine-off stillness of vehicles that are there on purpose. And he stood on the sidewalk outside his building, and his side hurt and his hands were shaking slightly, which he noticed with the detached interest of a man observing a fact about himself. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. He opened it and saw 3 words, and the 3 words were in English, and the English was Elena's specific cadence, the exact economy of someone who has spent years saying only what is necessary. I'm inside. Walking. 32 minutes to midnight. He put his phone in his pocket and stood on the sidewalk and breathed cold evening air and waited for the next message that would tell him whether 3 years of silence and sacrifice and one morning in a courthouse in the rain had meant something or had simply been the elaborate geography of a loss that was always going to happen one way or another. The street was quiet. The building behind him was not. Somewhere above him, on a 3rd floor, boxes of fabricated years sat under guard, intact, waiting to become the evidence that ended an organization that had spent a decade believing it was untouchable. And in Brussels, 31 minutes from midnight, Elena Marlowe was walking through the door of an institution that had held her family's legacy in protective suspension for 11 years, carrying documents that only she could present, doing the thing she had always done, moving forward, alone, and then, for the first time, not entirely. The text came at 11:51. 9 minutes before midnight. Caleb was still on the sidewalk outside the Harmon Street building, his left side throbbing with the specific insistence of an injury that hasn't decided yet how serious it intends to be. He read the message twice. Stay issued. Midnight holds. It's done. He read it a 3rd time. He put the phone in his pocket and stood very still on the empty street and felt something move through him that was not relief exactly. Relief was too clean a word, too immediate, without the weight of everything that had accumulated to make this moment possible. It was more like the specific sensation of a structure that has been under enormous load for an extended period finally being allowed to rest. Not the absence of pressure. The first real breath after the pressure lifts. He called the number back. It rang 4 times. Then her voice, slightly out of breath, the ambient sound of an institutional lobby behind her. Marble echo, distant footsteps, the hum of a building that had been processing other people's urgencies for decades before tonight. It worked, she said. I know. I got the text. The stay issued at 11:48, 3 minutes of margin. A pause in which he could hear her exhale, not a composed, managed exhale, the real kind. The administrator was a 70-year-old Belgian man who looked at my documentation for 4 minutes without speaking and then said, in perfect English, "We have been expecting someone to come for this for a very long time." Caleb said nothing for a moment. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in an hour." "Where's Adrian?" "Outside. He doesn't come into institutions if he can avoid it. Professional habit." Another pause. "Caleb, your side. One of Adrian's people said you went down on the 3rd floor." "I'm standing. It's fine." "That's not the same thing as fine." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her moving, the lobby sound shifting as she walked toward an exit, the ambient echo thinning. "Come to Brussels," she said. It came out in the plain, direct way of someone who has stopped performing anything in either direction, not asking permission, not making an offer, just stating a preference as a fact. "Tonight?" "There's a flight at 2. Adrian's people can arrange it." Another pause, and in it something that had been held at careful distance for most of their conversation came slightly closer. "I think we need to finish this conversation in the same room." "Which conversation?" "All of them," she said. "The ones we should have had." He looked up at the building in front of him. Somewhere above, Adrian's people were cataloging boxes and photographing labels, and doing the work that would translate 3 years of criminal positioning into the kind of evidence that institutions with authority actually act on. The work was not done. The network was not destroyed. Marcus Hale was going to spend a very uncomfortable next several months and Garrett Wynn's 9 years of association with Caleb were going to have a complicated and painful denouement that Caleb had not fully allowed himself to process yet. None of it was done. But the midnight deadline had passed, the stay was issued, the trust was protected, and Elena Marlowe was standing in a lobby in Brussels asking him to get on a plane. "I'll be there by 4, he said. He arrived at 3:57. Adrian had arranged a car from the airport, which meant the driver knew exactly where to go without being told, which was the specific practical efficiency of a man who had been running complicated logistics for decades. The car delivered Caleb to a hotel in the center of the city. Old building, wide stone facade, the kind of place that had absorbed a century of other people's significant moments without accumulating any visible emotion about it. Elena was in the lobby when he walked in. Seated in one of the low chairs near the window, still in the clothes she'd been wearing when she boarded the aircraft from England, a cup of something in her hands that had gone cold, judging by the way she was holding it. Not drinking, just holding, the way people hold warm things when they need the weight of them. She looked up when he came through the door. She looked at his face first, then dropped her eyes briefly to his left side, where he was moving with a slight compensation that he thought he was hiding and apparently was not. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine." "You said that already. Sit down anyway." He sat in the chair across from her. The lobby was quiet at this hour. One person at the front desk, a distant sound of a service elevator somewhere in the building, the specific silence of a large space after midnight. She looked at him across the low table between them. He looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment that stretched long enough to stop being uncomfortable and become something else. The particular quality of quiet between two people who have been through something together and don't need to immediately fill it. "Tell me about Garrett," she said finally. He had been expecting this and had also been dreading it, which is the standard condition of anticipating a necessary conversation. He breathed through it and started from where it needed to start. 9 years, he said. He came to me when the company was small enough that I was doing 3 people's jobs, and he walked in and did 2 of them without being asked. I've never had an assistant who could read a room the way he could, anticipate the need before it was spoken, know when to push and when to stay quiet. He paused. I thought it was instinct, loyalty. I thought I'd just been lucky. When did it start? Elena asked. His involvement with them. Based on the call pattern Adrian's people found, at least 2 years ago, maybe longer. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. He didn't compromise anything obvious, nothing that would have shown up in an audit. He just reported. What I knew, what I was thinking, where my attention was. Small intelligence, consistently fed. Long enough to be useful, Elena said. Not unkindly. Long enough to be dangerous. He looked at his hands. He knew I went to England. He knew about the Thursday plan. He handed Marcus the timeline that triggered everything moving early. He also called you at 3 in the morning, Elena said quietly, every time you needed him. Caleb looked up. I'm not defending what he did, she said. I'm saying people are not one thing. The version of him that was genuinely useful to you for 9 years was also real. That's what makes it complicated, and that's what makes it hurt, and you should let it hurt instead of converting it immediately into something operational. He looked at her. When did you get this direct? I've always been this direct, she said. You weren't in the room to hear it. It was said without accusation. That was the thing about Elena. The most precise observations came without sharpness, which made them land differently than they would have if she'd delivered them as weapons. You're right, he said. About Garrett? About all of it. He held her gaze. I was never in the room, not really. I was present in the way that someone can be present without participating. Body there, attention elsewhere, counting you as a fixed element of the background rather than a person with an interior life that I knew nothing about. He stopped. I told myself the silence was yours, that you'd made yourself unavailable. But I was the one who wasn't available, and I needed the silence to be your choice, so I didn't have to examine mine. The lobby hummed around them. Somewhere outside, Brussels was doing what European cities do in the early morning hours, living at a different frequency, quieter and more patient. Elena set her cold cup on the table. She looked at it for a moment, then back at him. I should have told you, she said. I know my reasoning. I've lived with my reasoning for 3 years, and it held up while I was building the plan. But when I sit here now and think about what it actually cost, she stopped, reorganized. I made a decision for you about what you were capable of, about how you would respond. And that decision was based on the version of you I had access to, which was the version that showed up to dinner already somewhere else in his head. She paused. That wasn't the only version of you. I know that now. But I didn't give you the chance to be something else. You had no reason to expect something else. No, she said, but I could have asked. The word asked sat between them, simple and enormous. 3 years of silence, and the antidote had been a single question. That was the specific cruelty of the thing, not the conspiracy, not Marcus's years of patient manipulation, not the trust freeze or the diverted aircraft, or any of the operational drama of the last 72 hours. The cruelty was the ordinary human failure at the center of it. 2 people in a house, both carrying weight, and neither one asking the other to help hold it. I'm asking now, Caleb said. Whatever comes next. Whatever the trust work means, the legal proceedings, the network. I'm asking to be in it. She looked at him steadily. Why? Because I spent 3 years in your house and didn't know you. And I've spent the last 4 days knowing you better than I knew you in all 3 years combined, and I'd like... He stopped. Let himself be less precise than he usually permitted himself to be. I'd like more of that. The lobby was very quiet. That's not a plan, Elena said. No, he agreed. It's a preference. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Elena's version of a smile was more interior than most people's, an expression that started somewhere behind the eyes and arrived at the face as a kind of warmth rather than a specific configuration of features. The trust proceedings are going to take months, she said. The legal challenge to the stay will come. The network will fight it because they have no choice. It's the only remaining play. The evidence from Harmon Street needs to be processed by the relevant authorities, and the case takes time to build. She paused. It's going to be a very complicated several months. I have experience with complicated. You have experience with financial complexity, she said. This is different. Teach me the difference, he said. Wasn't that what I said in England? The warmth behind her eyes came to the surface more fully. You said that to Adrian. The principle stands. She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't try to manage the look or redirect it or fill the space it occupied. He had spent 3 years filling spaces with activity and noise and the forward momentum of a man who treats stillness as a problem to be solved. He sat with it now. Let her look. Okay, she said. Quiet. Precise. The same word she had used in Adrian's estate when she'd agreed to get into the car, but carrying a completely different weight. He nodded. Neither of them moved toward the other. This was not the kind of moment that arrives at its destination through gesture. It arrived through the simple fact of 2 people sitting across a table in a Brussels hotel lobby at 4 in the morning and deciding that something was worth trying. 3 weeks later, Garrett Wynn met with federal financial crimes investigators for 4 hours in a conference room in a building that Caleb would never visit, and answered questions about his 2 years of communication with Marcus Hale's network. Caleb found out about the meeting from the investigator assigned to the Vossler Group's cooperating witness file. He sat with this information for a day. Then he called Garrett. Garrett picked up, which Caleb had not entirely expected. I'm cooperating, Garrett said. No preamble. His voice was quieter than Caleb remembered, with a quality of exhaustion that was specific to people who have been carrying something for a long time and have finally put it down in circumstances they did not choose. I know, Caleb said. I didn't... Garrett stopped. The first call I made to Marcus was because I was told that if I didn't, my sister's debt situation would be made very public in a way that would destroy her career. That was 2 years ago. After that, it became something I couldn't figure out how to stop. A pause. I know that's not an explanation. No, Caleb said. I'm sorry. The 2 words landed in the space between them, and Caleb held them and turned them over with the same honest attention Elena had told him to give the hurt, instead of converting it into something operational. I know, Caleb said again. He meant it as something more than acknowledgement, and Garrett heard it that way, because there was a long exhale on the other end of the line. Take care of yourself, Garrett. He hung up. He sat in his office, A different office now. A smaller one in the interim space Vossler Group was using while the 23rd floor underwent a comprehensive review. And he looked at the city through a window that was less grand than his old one and found that the city looked the same. Marcus Hale's cooperation agreement was announced 6 weeks after the Harmon Street operation. He provided detailed testimony about the network's structure, its financial mechanisms, and the specific individuals who had directed the acquisition strategy against Elena's trust. In exchange, his charges were reduced from their original scope to a set of financial fraud counts that his attorneys were confident would result in a suspended sentence and substantial fines. Caleb read about this in a document forwarded by the investigator and felt nothing particularly clean about it. Justice in the operational sense and justice in the human sense had never been the same thing, and he was old enough to know that demanding they be the same was a form of romanticism he couldn't afford. He forwarded the document to Elena with a single line, "For your records." She replied 20 minutes later, "I saw it. Thank you for sending it." Then, after a brief pause, a second message. "Are you in the city this weekend?" He was. Adrian Ravel came to see Caleb in the 4th week. Not at the office. He called and asked if Caleb would meet him at a private location he named. A restaurant in a neighborhood Caleb didn't know well, small and quiet, and the kind of place that required a specific introduction to find. Caleb went. Adrian was already seated when he arrived, and he had ordered wine, which he did not pour until Caleb sat down. This small courtesy felt intentional. Everything Adrian did felt intentional, which was either the quality of a very deliberate man or the quality of a man so deeply habituated to control that it had become indistinguishable from natural behavior. Possibly both. "I wanted to speak to you without Elena present," Adrian said, "because some things are easier to say without the person they're primarily about in the room." "All right," Caleb said. "I've known her since she was 12 years old." Adrian poured the wine, set the bottle down. "Her father was a difficult man in many ways, but he loved his daughter with a specificity that I found genuinely affecting. When he died, I made a promise that was not asked of me, but that I made nonetheless. I have kept it for 11 years. He picked up his glass but didn't drink. He looked at the table as though organizing something. "There were moments," he said, "when keeping that promise required me to accept that I could not give her what she actually needed. Protection is not the same as presence. Safety is not the same as a life." He paused. "She made herself invisible because I taught her that visibility was the threat. That was a necessary lesson and also a cage, and I built the cage with the best intentions available to me at the time." Caleb listened. He did not offer the reflexive reassurance that the situation seemed to invite, because he sensed that Adrian was not looking for reassurance and would not respect it if offered. "She chose to come out of that invisibility on her own timeline," Adrian continued. "The divorce was her plan, not mine. I would have found another way. I am not without resources, and I am not without patience. She chose to use herself as the mechanism because she wanted it to be over, and she wanted to see—" He stopped, set the glass down. "She wanted to see what you would do when you lost her." Caleb held very still. "You were a test," Adrian said. "Not a cruel one, but a test. She needed to know whether the man she had married was the version that signed the papers without hesitating, or whether there was something else underneath, and the only way she could find out was to give you the full weight of the loss and see if you came back from it." The restaurant hummed around them. Caleb thought about the courthouse, the pen touching the signature line and his hand not trembling. Elena across the table with eyes like still water. "She could have just asked me," he said. "Yes," Adrian agreed. "She could have, but she had spent 3 years trying to read you through the available evidence, and the available evidence was not encouraging." He looked at Caleb directly. "I am telling you this because you should know it, not because it changes anything. She told me about Brussels, and about the conversation in the lobby, and I think you already understand more than you did. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the complete architecture of what happened, and because I will not tell you again." "Fair," Caleb said. "She is not easy," Adrian said. "Not in the way that people use that word, meaning emotionally requiring. She is not requiring. She is demanding in a deeper sense. She will require you to be exactly as present as she needs, which is completely, and she will not ask twice if you fail it." He paused. "She never asked me twice, and I was the most constant presence in her life for 11 years. Caleb absorbed this. "Are you warning me?" "I'm informing you," Adrian said. The decision is yours. He picked his glass up again and this time drank. She does not need you. I want to be clear about that. The trust is stable, the network is substantially dismantled, her legal position is the strongest it has been in 11 years. She is not a woman who requires saving. He set the glass down. But she is a woman who could choose to let someone in. Whether that person is worth the choice is the only question that matters. And you're asking whether I'm worth it, Caleb said. I'm observing, Adrian said, that you went to England uninvited and then to Brussels, and then stood in the corridor of your own building and got knocked into a door frame rather than step aside, and that you called her before you called anyone else when you were standing on the sidewalk afterward. He looked at Caleb with the steady, undecorated gaze of a man who has spent his life reading people in high-stakes situations. I am not asking a question. I am noting evidence. Caleb met his gaze. What happens to you after all this? Adrian considered the question with the care it deserved. I am closing the active portion of my involvement in certain kinds of work, he said. There are people who will require transition management and arrangements that cannot simply be abandoned, but the chapter that required what I have been is ending. He paused. I am not young, and Elena is safe in a way she has not been since she was 12 years old. The work is done. He said the work is done with the specific weight of a man putting down something very heavy that he has carried for a very long time, and Caleb recognized in it the same quality he'd felt standing on the Brussels sidewalk after Elena's message. Not triumph, not clean relief, but the particular exhaustion of a person who has finally been allowed to stop. They finished the wine. They talked for another hour about things that were not Elena, about the city, about a development project Caleb described in general terms, about the specific character of institutions that survive longer than the people who build them. Adrian was, when not in his operational register, a man of considerable intelligence and dry humor, and the conversation had the quality of two people who have come to each other from opposing angles and found, in the space between their positions, something unexpected. When they left, Adrian shook Caleb's hand in the doorway of the restaurant. She has her father's patience, Adrian said, and her mother's precision. Both are formidable. He held Caleb's hand for a moment before releasing it. Don't waste either of them. He walked away into the city without looking back, the way people walk when they're genuinely comfortable with what they're leaving behind. 6 months after the courthouse. The trust's administrative stay had been converted, through a process that involved 3 jurisdictions, 2 law firms, and a set of testimony that Marcus Hale's cooperation made possible, into a full restoration order. Elena Marlowe was the sole and uncontested beneficiary of the Marlowe Trust, activated and fully operative for the first time since her 24th birthday. She marked this not with celebration, but with work. She had a meeting with the Trust's newly appointed administrators on the morning the order was issued and spent 4 hours going through 11 years of protected assets, understanding what existed and what it could become. Caleb knew this because she told him over dinner that evening in a restaurant that was neither grand nor particularly notable, a neighborhood place she had chosen, where the tables were close and the lighting was what it was, and nobody required anything of anyone. She described the meeting with the precision of someone who has waited a long time for a specific thing and is now taking her time with the reality of it. He listened the way he had learned to listen, not building a response while she spoke, but actually in it, the conversation, the whole room. The administrator said the trust is significantly larger than the original projections, she said. 11 years of protected growth. There are assets my parents built that I didn't know existed. How does that feel? She thought about the question, not the reflexive answer, the actual answer. Like receiving a letter from someone who died, she said. You're glad to have it, and you grieve that you can't tell them you got it. He nodded. He didn't dress it up. I've been thinking about the foundation, she said. What Adrian said I'd mentioned in England, about using the resources for people in situations like mine. Hidden people. People running from something powerful with no resources and no structure to help them. She turned her wine glass slowly. It's not a simple thing to build. The infrastructure alone will... Identification, legal support, financial protection, secure communication. It would take years to do it right. Yes, he said. I want to do it right, she said. Not fast. Right. Then do it right. She looked at him. You're not going to offer to fund it. It's your trust, he said. Your project, your architecture. Something in her face settled. A small easing, barely visible, the expression of someone who is testing whether a person understood a thing and has just received the right answer. "But I might ask for other kinds of help," she said, "specifically the kind that involves knowing how to build institutions without making the structural mistakes that take decades to correct." "That I can do," he said. She nodded. She looked at her plate. She looked back at him. "Caleb," she said. Not a preface. Just his name, the way you say someone's name when you're not introducing anything, when the name itself is the complete sentence. "Yeah," he said. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I know how to be careful. I know how to plan. I know how to survive." She paused. "I don't know how to do this." He understood what this was. He didn't pretend otherwise. "Neither do I," he said. "I know how to close deals. I know how to read a room. I know how to project certainty I don't entirely feel." He held her gaze. "I don't know how to be present in the particular way you need, but I'm learning. That's the accurate version." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still here." The restaurant moved around them. Other conversations, other people's evenings, the ordinary, continuous life of a room full of people who were not in the middle of anything dramatic, just present. Elena picked up her fork. She ate. He ate. They talked about other things, a book she was reading, a problem in the Foundation's early planning that she was trying to solve, a story he told badly about a site inspection that had gone wrong in a way that was only funny in retrospect. She laughed at the part where it got genuinely absurd. It was not a performed laugh. He had learned the difference. 3 months after that dinner, on a Tuesday morning that was unremarkable in every meteorological and civic sense, Elena Marlowe sat down at a desk in the newly leased office space of the Marlowe Foundation for Protective Resources and opened her laptop and began the first working day of a project that would take years and would be difficult and would not go smoothly and would matter. She had 3 staff members, 2 contracted consultants, and 1 lawyer who had agreed to work on a reduced fee arrangement until the Foundation's financial structure was fully operational. She had Caleb Vossler's cell number in her phone and a standing dinner on Thursday evenings that had not yet been canceled. She had a trust bearing her family's name, active and protected, and entirely her own. She had the specific quality of quiet that belongs to people who have survived something long and hard and have come out with most of themselves intact. Not all, not without cost, but enough. The fundamental enough that lets a person sit down at a desk on a Tuesday morning and begin. She opened a new document. She typed a name at the top, the Foundation's first active case, referred by a legal contact Adrian had sent before he stepped back from operational involvement. A woman in another city. A difficult situation. No resources. Nowhere obvious to go. Elena read the file once. Then she picked up her phone and called the first number on the consultation list and said, without any particular drama, "I've looked at the case. Let's talk about what she needs." Outside the office window, the city moved and breathed and carried its ordinary weight of complexity and mess and human decision-making. And the morning light came through the glass at the angle it comes through in the middle of autumn, clear and slightly gold and without sentiment. It was not a perfect ending. It was the beginning of something that was going to require daily commitment and imperfect execution and honest repair when the repair was needed. It was the kind of thing that you don't build in a courthouse or a hotel lobby or a Brussels institution or a warehouse corridor, but in the accumulated evidence of ordinary days, the ones where you show up and the ones where you fail and the ones where you tell the truth about the failure instead of converting it into something else. Caleb Vossler understood this now in a way he had not understood anything before it, which was slowly, incompletely, with the specific humility of a man who had been wrong about the most important things and was learning to treat that not as a wound to his identity, but as the beginning of an accurate one. Elena Marlowe understood it in the way she understood most things. She had known it for years and had been waiting to see whether the knowing would get to be useful. It was going to be useful. That was enough. That was in fact more than enough.